Mom and brother bullied me for years when Dad was away. So I recorded them and sent it to him. Now he filed for divorce and my family is saying I should never have been born. I, 16F, have an older brother, 18M, and he is pretty much the golden child, but just for my mother. My mom has never bothered to hide it from anybody that she has a favorite child and well, it is not me. Right from when I was a child, I knew that my mom liked my brother way more than she liked me. I could never figure out the reason for it, because I would always try to mimic my brother and do whatever he does, just as an attempt to win my mother over. But whatever quality she found to be endearing in him, she found annoying in me, so eventually, I gave up trying to impress her because that was an impossible task. At least my father seemed to like me for who I am as a person and did not expect me to be an exact replica of my brother in order to find me worthy of being loved. My father didn't have a favorite, he treated my brother and me as equals, and I am and forever will be grateful for that because at least I had one parent who was normal and had my back. My mother, unfortunately, was not the best person to be around, and she made sure that this certain side of hers only came out when she was alone with my brother and I. She never even put a toe out of line whenever my dad was around. Things would have been much easier for me if my dad had been around for long, but when I was younger, he had to travel a lot for work and still does. So I ended up spending a lot of time with my mother and brother. The problem was that my mom was a stay-at-home mother, and she was just always there. Anytime I would come back home from school, she was there to start bullying me immediately and make me doubt myself. She would constantly comment on my appearance and constantly find things that she could nitpick at, giving me new insecurities every day. For the record, I was an exceptionally skinny child, and nobody likes that in women, something that my mother constantly reminded me of. I also had glasses and really weird hair, which she also seemed to hate because in spite of the horrible person that she was deep down, she was actually quite pretty. And so was my brother. She kept saying that she wished I had also inherited her genes, but unfortunately, I was an ugly duckling. And she made sure that I didn't forget about it. There was also the fact that my brother was great at a lot of things, like sports and academics. I was a good student and academically sound, but I was miserable at sports. I am serious, I had zero hand-eye coordination, and I hated any athletic activities, but my mother always pushed me into taking part because she believed that it would somehow fix my body and make me more desirable to look at. She would also force-feed me things that she thought were good for me, like excessive amounts of protein. Let's be honest, there is only so much meat that people can consume before they start feeling nauseated at the sight of it, and that's what happened to me. It's probably why I switched to vegetarianism a few years ago, because of all the beef and chicken that my mother fed me as a child. It didn't help me either, because some people are just built skinny, and I happen to be one of those people. I didn't even have a problem with my body until my mother started picking on it, and to hide it, I started wearing really baggy clothes and my brother's old hand-me-down because I was scared of what my mother would say if I wore clothes that showed off my body. So that's how things were for me up until a few years ago, which is when I found out that the one thing that I was really good at was swimming. I hadn't tried it before because my mother hadn't pushed me to, since she herself was pretty scared of the water. But then, I got an opportunity to try out for the swimming team a couple of years ago, and that's when I started. And I have got to say, I don't mean to come off cheesy, but that practically changed my life. I finally had something that I was good at and I started putting my heart and soul into it. In no time, I started getting more toned and actually put on a considerable amount of weight, which made me look better. And I was also a lot more confident in myself because I was finally getting better and I was just very happy. My mother and brother, however, were not very thrilled about this development because it just meant that they had fewer opportunities to pick on me about my appearance. I was looking better now, so they had nothing to say about it, and for a while, I almost thought that they would give up. But I really underestimated how much the two of them disliked me because soon after, they started finding other ways to annoy me. They started giving me, what I call, the Cinderella treatment because they expected me to be at their beck and call throughout the day. Anytime they saw me sitting around, and just relaxing, they would assign me some work to do, and soon enough, it was like I was doing all the chores around the house. Actually, let me correct that, it wasn't like I was doing everything around the house, I was doing everything around the house. Whenever my father was away on a business trip, they would make sure that I did all the work around the house while they just made up excuses and found ways to get out of doing whatever needed to be done. Anytime that I would tell them that I was tired or exhausted from school, they would just tell me that I had to do it because if I didn't do the chores around the house, there was nobody else to do it because my mother was also tired since she was getting old, even though she was just in her 40s and it's not even that old. And well, my brother was involved in so many activities at school that it was quite believable for him to be exhausted all the time, enough to get out of doing all the work. So I was, to put it bluntly, their Cinderella, and I was doing all the work around the house while they just sat back and let me do it. And not let me do it, they wanted me to do it because that would tire me out and I would have to give up eventually, but I made up my mind that no matter what, I was not going to give up the one thing that brought me joy. And anyway, they would only put me through this, whenever my father was not around, which happened to be for almost half of the month. But then, for the other half, they would just have to be normal and we would have to do our own chores. Now, a lot of you might be wondering, why did I never talk to my father about this? Well, For starters, I didn't want to stir any trouble in my family because, at the end of the day, I wanted everybody to be happy. I guess one could say that I was a bit of a people pleaser, and that led to most of my problems. I was always just trying to make everybody happy, and I knew that my dad really loved my mother. They were high school sweethearts and they married as soon as they graduated from college. I had heard about how much they loved each other from various relatives. I knew that it would just break my father's heart if he ever got to know about what a monster my mother had turned into. So I never said anything because I didn't want to break his heart. To be more precise, I didn't want to be the one who had to break his heart by telling him the truth. So I just hoped and prayed that maybe either he would come across the truth on his own, or maybe my mother, by some miracle, would become a good person. But that never happened. I also had a nagging doubt that maybe if I told my father the truth, he would just not believe me, and since my mother and my brother always put up a great act in front of him, of being a good parent, and a good sibling, there were quite high chances of that happening. And I didn't want to get ahead of myself, tell my dad how my mother was treating me and how my brother seemed to enjoy it, and then not have him believe me, because that would ruin the only good relationship that I had with anybody in my family. So I just decided to keep my mouth shut and suffered through it all silently. But recently, I changed my mind, and I decided that I was going to have to expose my mother and my brother because they were getting a little too much. I was getting very tired of doing all the work around the house. Because, while earlier I didn't have much homework because I was in a lower grade, I was in a few AP classes now and I couldn't afford to lose any more time and energy. I also got a phone a couple of months ago, something that I didn't have earlier because my parents were the kind of people who believed that it would ruin my future, and I don't know if they were right or not. But it was definitely quite annoying and inconvenient, to say the least. So for my 16th birthday, my father got me a brand new phone of my own for my personal use. Now, these two factors combined, led me to the conclusion that I absolutely had to expose my mother and my brother now, because I had the means to, and I was also just really tired of how they had been treating me for the past couple of years just because they did not want to see me happy. 2 weeks back, I got my first C on an assignment because the day before I was supposed to submit it, I had to do a lot of laundry because my mom refused to do it and my brother claimed that he was too tired, and so, I had to do it because I needed clean clothes to wear, and there would be a lot of hue and cry about it if I just decided to do my own clothes and left theirs out. So I decided to do all of it, and it took up a huge chunk of my time, which is why I was not able to devote enough time and energy to my essay, which is why it came off a bit half-hearted. And I got a bad grade because of it, which was really unfair because it wasn't even my fault. But the teacher didn't know how I was being treated at home, so I wasn't exactly going to blame her either. I confronted my mother when I came back home after I got my essay graded and told her that I was not going to do any of the work around the house and that she and her son would have to pull their weight, but she just told me that it was my own fault that I had flunked because if I had just put in a little more effort then I probably wouldn't have to be making excuses for myself, and brought up how my brother was still able to score well while taking part in everything else, and here I was, making excuses and blaming other people for my own failures. I think that was my breaking point, my last straw, and I decided that I had to put an end to this because I had had enough. I couldn't record it at the time, but I decided that the next time she would say something or do something of the sort, I would have my camera set up to capture it all, and I would send it to my dad and he would deal with this. After that incident, the next day, my dad came back home and stayed here with us for a few days until he had to leave again and we were on our own. And this time, I knew that, as soon as he left, the two of them would gang up against me and bully me into doing their dirty work. So the day that my dad left, I had my phone set up to record as soon as he left, and just as I had expected, my mom and my brother barged into my room as soon as my dad had left and started giving me a list of chores that I had to do. They didn't even say please, just told me that I had to do this and that, and then, at the end, they said that I needed to get to work. But this time, I decided to put my foot down, just to see what would happen, and I told them that I was not going to do any of it. Luckily, they thought that it would be a good idea to be nasty to me because they were not aware of the camera that I had set up in my room and the fact that I was recording them. My mother called me a lazy cow and said that she was just training me to do all the work around the house because, given my grades and my laziness, I would never amount to anything, so it was pointless for me to study and waste their money. And my brother joined and started saying that just because he could do it all, didn't mean that I could as well, and I should just give up trying because it was pathetic, and I should just stick to doing the household chores because at least that would guarantee me a housekeeper job in the future. They said a few other nasty things as well and were really being mean at that time, more than usual, which was lucky for me because I recorded it all. My blood was boiling, but I kept my mouth shut because I knew that this was probably the last time that they would get the opportunity to pick on me like this and gang up against me. I was about to put an end to it forever. Once they had had their fun, my mother told me to get to work as soon as possible, instead of wasting my time, and then left the room and shut the door behind her. As soon as she left, I decided to stop recording and send the video to my father with a long message about how this is the kind of treatment that I have been receiving at home for the past God knows how many years. And I told him everything, literally everything that I had been keeping to myself for so long. I told him about all the bullying, the way that the two of them came up against me whenever he was not around, and how they had been making me work like a maid for them. I also made sure to mention all the nasty comments that the two of them had always been making against me, how I had been afraid to stand up against them for so long because of all the bullying, and that it had really taken a toll on me because it was affecting my grades now. I guess it hadn't even been an hour since my father had left the house when I sent him that video, and I figured that he might have been on his flight at that point. But luckily, he hadn't boarded his flight yet, and he had been able to see my message before that. As soon as he saw it, he told me to lock myself in my room and not do anything, and that he was coming back home immediately. For about 45 minutes, I stayed quietly in my room, and then I heard my dad pull up in the driveway, and I knew that things were about to go down now. I stayed in my room even after I heard my mom open the door and ask my father what he was doing back home so soon. Literally seconds later, I heard my dad yelling at my mom about the video that I had sent her, and he asked her and my brother what they were playing at. They tried to pass it off as a prank, but my father had read the message that I had sent him, and he told them to cut it out because he knew everything, and he demanded an explanation. And that's when my mother realized that the jig was up. There was no hiding it anymore, and my dad had finally found out about the way she had been treating me. She started begging and apologizing, saying that her frustration got the better of her because she was just tired, and she took it out on me, but my dad called her bluff on it and said that he knew the real reason for it. I don't know what that was about, and I still don't know because my dad refuses to tell me anything about it. But anyway, after that, they went into their bedroom and I could hear them yelling, but I couldn't make out the words, so I don't know what they were fighting about. All I know is that after about half an hour, my mother was packing her bags and leaving while sobbing hysterically, and my dad told my brother to go with her, and he agreed, no questions asked. I had come out of my room by that point, and I had no idea what was going on, but I knew that whatever was happening, it was not good. After the two of them had left, it was just me and my dad, and I finally worked up the courage to ask him what had happened. He didn't tell me much, he just told me that I was safe now and that I wouldn't have to put up with my mother anymore. My dad seemed to be in a pretty bad mood at the time, so I didn't ask any further questions and decided to lock myself back in my room again. The next day, he came to me and told me that he was sorry about the way he had behaved the previous day, but he just had a lot going on, and he said that now, I wouldn't have to worry about my mother ever again. He told me that he was filing for a divorce and that it was just going to be me and him now because my mother was out of the picture. He also apologized for the fact that I even had to put up with her for so long, and he said that he wished that I had told him about what was going on earlier so he would have nipped it in the bud, but regardless, he had made his decision, and he hoped that we would have a better future now. I was actually pretty happy that they were getting divorced because it just meant that I would not have to deal with my mother again. She had made me miserable, along with my brother, for 16 years of my life, and by sending one video to my dad, I had just made sure that she wouldn't be able to do that for the next 16 years as well. So I was pretty proud of myself for standing up to her and finally calling her out. It was well deserved, and it was about time that I did it. The next few days were quite peaceful because my dad would just work in his office quietly and we would talk at meal times, but other than that, we mostly kept to ourselves. I knew that he was hurting, but I didn't know how to fix that, so I just tried to be there for him in my own little ways. We would have good conversations whenever we were talking, so that was one way for me to bring some peace to him. But other than that, I knew that he was heartbroken and that he really missed my mother. And then, a few days ago, my mother was finally served with the divorce papers, and I found out about it, because my grandparents, my mom's parents, decided that they were going to call me up and yell at me about it. My grandparents and I have never been on the best of terms because they were just an extension of my mother and I didn't like them at all. So when they called me, I thought I would just decline the call, but then they kept calling me and eventually, I had to answer the call. As soon as I picked up, they started yelling at me and told me that I was a curse on this family and that everyone would be much better off without me. They have always hated me, but this was taking things a little too far, so I told them that they couldn't speak to me this way, but they said that they could speak to me however they wanted to because I had ruined their daughter's life. They said that I was the reason that she was getting divorced now and that all these years of marriage had been completely flushed down the drain because of me and that one video that I sent. They called me ungrateful because it was my mother who had brought me into the world, in spite of several complications during her pregnancy, that I didn't even know about, and yet, I had stopped her in the back and screwed her over. My grandma told me that my mother had brought me into the world at the risk of losing her own life, not so I could ruin her marriage one day, and told me that she wished her daughter had terminated the pregnancy like she had suggested because that would have been better than having a daughter like me. My grandpa decided to twist the knife even more and told me that my mother was inconsolable after she received the divorce papers, asked me if I was finally happy now, since I had the house to myself, and my father was never going to see my mother again. I tried to tell him that that wasn't even my intention, and I didn't tell my father to divorce my mom, but they hung up before I could say anything to defend myself and then blocked me. And since then, I have been racked with guilt because I feel like the worst person on earth, right now. I know that they were trying to manipulate me and I feel like they succeeded a little bit because I just feel so bad about what happened and I feel that I need to fix this somehow. Ida for sending my dad a video of my mom and my brother teaming up against me to make me work for them, which led to him filing for divorce. Update 1. Hey, so a lot of you people were asking if I am adopted or if I was an unwanted child, and I don't have the answer to that as of now, but I know for a fact that I'm not adopted, that's for sure. I might have been an unwanted child for my mother though, that was pretty evident from her behavior. I'm not apologizing to her, and I'm definitely not trying to take back whatever I did. I'm not telling my father to cancel the divorce or whatever. That's just too much. My grandparents and my mom can stay mad. After everything that they put me through for all these years, they can't expect anything good from me or any forgiveness or sympathy at all. They do not deserve it, and they have proven it to me time and again. Especially with all the things that my grandparents said to me on the phone call the other day, it's a miracle that I even felt guilty about anything. But I guess that's just the people pleaser in me, and I'm trying to work on it so it doesn't get to me and affect my future decisions. I have talked to my dad about it, and we think that it's a good idea for me to start therapy because I told him that the only reason that I didn't tell him anything for so long was because I didn't want to make anybody unhappy, and I knew that if I told him about my mother, it would break his heart. There was also the fact that I hoped that my mom would eventually come around and treat me like a human being, but it never happened. There was also a lot of self-doubt, because, for some reason, I believed that maybe my dad would not believe me if I told him the truth, so I had to get proof of everything first. Then I'd just have a lot of issues to work through, so we are considering therapy right now, and if everything goes well, I might start in a couple of days. Update 2, hi, so I'm back here, and I finally have the answer to why my mother hated me. You guys were right, I wasn't adopted, but I definitely was an unwanted pregnancy. I finally asked my dad about what he had said, while arguing with my mother, the day that he kicked her out of the house. In my original post, I mentioned that there was a part where my dad had said that he knew the real reason why my mother was treating me so badly, but I didn't ask him about it that day because it had been a very emotionally draining day for all of us, and I didn't want to add on to his troubles. Plus, it didn't seem like something he wanted to discuss either, so I just let it be. But today, a couple of hours ago, I finally brought it up with my dad and asked him about what he meant by it, because after that, he had gone into their own room and I couldn't hear the rest of the argument, so I didn't know what that was about. And today, he finally told me that I had actually been an unwanted pregnancy and my mom was done after one kid. She wanted to terminate the pregnancy when she found out about me, but my dad was a little upset about it and she decided to keep the baby, just for my dad's sake. He didn't tell her to, but he was just upset, which is why she did it anyway. And then I was born, after a lot of complications and issues, and it took a lot out of my mother, which is why she kind of resented me after I was born, but my dad never expected her to treat me this way. She had said that she never felt connected to me as a baby, but he just assumed it was one of the symptoms of postpartum depression. He thought that it would go away with time, but it never did. Both of us started crying, because even though I had known about this, I had sort of guessed it on my own. It still hurt to hear it from him, and he told me that he felt responsible for everything that I had been through, and we hugged and had a really emotionally relieving conversation. I feel much better now, knowing the truth is finally out in the open. I don't owe my mother anything, and while I'm grateful that she brought me into the world, she didn't really treat me well after that, so I don't have anything to be grateful to her for anymore. I bear no ill will towards her and I'm letting go of everything, gracefully. Update 3, hey, folks. So I have been in therapy for about 2 weeks now and I have 2 sessions per week. It's been going well so far, and during this time, I think I'm only going to get better. I have 1 solo session and 1 session with my dad, so we can also work on our relationship and rebuild it from scratch so that we can have a healthier bond going forward. The divorce proceedings have also started, and a few days ago, my mom and my brother came back to collect the last of their things because my mom was moving in permanently with her parents and so was my brother. They didn't speak to me and avoided eye contact to the best of their abilities, which I am thankful for because it just meant that I wouldn't have to deal with them or speak to them either. They can hate me all they want to, but it doesn't change the fact that they were the ones who brought this situation upon themselves by treating them with nothing but cruelty all their lives. Now, they deserve whatever they get. And I refuse to feel sorry for them. All I care about right now is rebuilding my relationship with my dad and just being as happy as I can, living my life to the fullest.